So this is an opportunity for questions, and between Dave Bennett, Gordy and myself, we'll attempt to answer them. We'd welcome any questions. As I mentioned at the beginning, just waiting for the microphone would just assist everybody in hearing. So, Andrew.
My name's Andrew Watt. You've spoken about Australia. I've read about some horror stories of what's been happening in the aged care industry in Australia, and I was wondering whether you could talk a bit more about what's going to happen over there with practices. Are the politicians going to get involved, regulation, and that sort of thing?
Right, yeah, well, there have certainly been some horror stories. Avio is probably the horror story that you're referring to. And Debbie McClure is actually assuming a role in a national organisation which is driving for better standards. But it might be a good chance maybe for our Australian director to pass comment on how does it feel on the ground, given the difficulties that have been experienced in the sector over there. George, would you like to maybe start?
Sure, David. Can you hear me okay? Yep. The Four Corners report created a lot of interest over there and a bit of shock as well. I think the Avio experiences that were shown, you wouldn't want to overweight them as the majority experiences, but they did shock and expose poor practices in the sector. And I think that in terms of opportunity for Ryman, it would just create an even more significant contrast in the benefits that Ryman bring. Trust in a legal contract that you can understand, the integration of services from lifestyle to high care, which is not the norm in Australia. The two sectors are separated. You'd have lifestyle without care, or nursing home high care without an experience that's warm and supportive. So Ryman brings a continuum of care which is not the norm. It brings it in a new village, so it's fresh and inviting. And it brings a series of financial engagement contract terms that are superior than the Australian market has been offering. Lower deferred management fees, no surcharges when people move around, and assurance that you can move into the village at the next level without the concern that there will be a place or whether you'd be given a priority. So, this is actually going to make it an even stronger proposition for Ryman against the rest of the sector. And I think even though there is real competition in the sector, don't get me wrong, and the baby boomer bubble is very, very intense, 5 to 6 times the volume that's in New Zealand, so it's a huge, and Melbourne is a very large market for volume. The real significant competition is our ability to actually maximise our opportunity rather than trying to beat the people next to us, because I suspect Ryman is already way, way in front, so it's going to be a great experience.
Yeah. Gordy.
And the only thing I would add to that is, George, is that we are actually pushing for two things that we believe the industry should think about very strongly in Australia, which work well here and I think provide residents and operators with really good protections. The first one is that it's a requirement in New Zealand before you enter into a retirement village contract to receive independent legal advice so that your lawyer takes you through the contract and signs off that they've explained it to you in a way which is appropriate for someone of your age. And there's the law industry does a lot of training on that to make sure they get it right. And there's no requirement for independent legal sign-off of retirement village contracts in Australia. And I think that's quite a big hole, actually. So we're encouraging, through Debbie's work with the industry group, for there to be lobbying with government to do that. The second thing which works well in New Zealand is that there's an external statutory supervisor appointed for every single retirement village who are monitored by the FMA to oversee the good operation of the village and to make sure that residents are getting what they've been promised. And those statutory supervisors, again, don't exist in Australia. So I think those resident protections, and they're also operator protections really, we're going to lobby strongly that they should be introduced in the Australian market.
So, Andrew, that possibly answers your question. So it does us no good for the sector to be impugned by bad care. So we're keen to raise the standards of the sector generally and how they deliver, but we believe that our product is an exemplar, really. Thank you. Sid. Sebastian.
I didn't quite understand whether the Melbourne properties would contribute to this current year's profit. That was one question. The other question regards bank funding. I see we're up about 293 million owing to the bank, and banks can be difficult at times, and I'm just wondering whether that is as safe as it might be. And my last comment, which is not a question, is the realised net profit figure of 178 million. If you're looking at the accounts, it's very, very hard to find. I know this is an accounting thing, but if you look for it, the chairman says 178 million. If you want to find it, you go to page 49, which is fair enough, but there should be an indication that is on page 49. It's just a small thing. I like to see where, if the profit is a certain figure, I like to actually see the figure.
Absolutely.
So anyway, the Melbourne was the first one, and then the banks, please. Yes. Thank you.
So the third one first. Yes, look, the way the accounts are presented is not determined by us as individuals, but you're quite right. I'm not going to defend the way in which accounts are presented. Yep, indeed. The bank question. Yes, the borrowings with the bank have increased. These, of course, are to fund our activity. As I said in my presentation, it fundamentally is required for us to fund everything. If we stopped developing and we built out all our land, we would have a very low level of debt. Our core debt is very small, so we borrow to develop. We also are particularly prudent about maintaining adequate headroom between what we actually borrow and what our allowed borrowings are. And I just observed that we have a relationship with all the leading banks, and they continue to be very supportive. Gordy relates to them much more closely than myself and Dave, but do you have any other comment?
Look, the reason why the banks see us as a very good lend is that we're unusual in that by most other companies, if you lend money to, say, a manufacturing facility, and then the bank needs the machinery to be sold down to repay debt, the earnings of that manufacturing facility disappear. So it creates problems with earnings and that sort of thing. With us, actually building out and selling down our villages creates development earnings, and then also triggers resale gains in the future, management fees and care fees. So because we recycle capital, it means we can both repay back our bank debt down for each site as we develop it out, and also we add to our recurring earnings as well as we discharge bank debt. So at any one point in time, our bank debt is just a function of how much land we have in the land bank. So we've increased our land bank in Melbourne substantially in the last sort of 9 months or so, Sid. In fact, our land bank's up sort of over 30%. And also, as we're gearing into building more apartment-style villages, they do require more working capital investment up front, which then, of course, is recycled as people move in. So we're managing it very carefully, and our banks just couldn't be more supportive of our plans.
Thanks, Sid. Sir,
there was one other question, David, actually.
Was it?
Yeah. Sid's other question was, will Melbourne feature in the FY18 results? At this stage, our target would be for some development margin at Brandon Park to be recognised in the FY18 results. It's early days yet, Sid. What we'll need to see achieved there is substantial building progress for the first apartment block over the next 9 months or so.
Sir.
Graham Tate, Mr. Chairman. If I read these accounts right, roughly about a third of the care fees are contributed by government to Ryman. Is the situation in Australia going to be similar, where care fees are paid to a considerable extent by the government, or will they be paid by the private residents?
Yep. So in Australia, it's a very similar situation actually, where care is subsidised by the government, and it's based on means testing depending on how many assets and how much income someone has. Australia has split how you pay for care into 3 different buckets. The first one is the room itself, which can be paid for by way of an accommodation bond or a rental or a monthly rental. The second part is what's called a basic daily fee, which is the real basics of life, if you like, which is set at 85% of the pension in Australia. And then the third one, which is the larger fee, is in relation to the care services that you require. In Australia, they run a system called the Aged Care Funding Instrument, which assesses your needs based on your complex healthcare needs, your assistance with daily living, and also any sort of behavioural aspects that need to be taken into account. Once that assessment is made, that's how much care is required, and how much that is paid for by the person or the government depends on that person's assets and income. So the government is a substantial contributor to aged care in Australia as it is in New Zealand, just done in a slightly different way.
So there's still the asset test in both countries. So you'll be aware the asset test in New Zealand is $220,000. And I think roughly 50% of our residents are on government funding in New Zealand. I think it's roughly that, yeah. Sir?
Thank you. Donald Arthur, you have a goal of doubling in 5 years. What do you see as the biggest impediment to you achieving that goal, and how will you address it?
Well, increasing the growth every 15% every year gets harder and harder. So that is problem number one, because 15% of 100 is 15, isn't it? But 15% of 200 is 30. So it is a ever increasing challenge. So that's problem number one. We seem to have, with the skill set of people like Andrew, good access to land. The consenting process remains quite a challenge, and different councils are variable in their enthusiasm to move quickly. So we find that that's quite a challenge. Alan, you should talk to Andrew about that after we finish. So some of them are quite fast, some are quite slow, and that is a big challenge. And then there's the sort of pressure on construction, the construction team. So in Auckland, there certainly is pressure on resources. We actually have some of our construction subcontractors going from Christchurch to assist in Auckland and that sort of thing, just because it's very hard to get reliable, consistent quality standards that we seek. So those are the challenges rather than demand. And any other question? No, look, thank you very much. So we'll just go back to the business. So in accordance with the company's constitution, Claire Higgins and Doug Mackay retire by rotation at today's meeting. You'll have noticed that Doug Mackay is not with us today, and as advised in the notice of annual meeting, he is not seeking reappointment. I can advise you that I found him to be a very valued contributor to the company, with a wealth of experience, both in terms of governance experience as well as good, solid business skill sets. His past time as a chief executive chief executive positions in large organisations across quite a wide range of sectors was really insightful and gave us great perspectives, and those qualities and contributions are really important. He's brought to the table over the 3 years deep experience, both international and national companies that have been on significant growth paths, rather like Ryman, and it's clear that those skills have been a real advantage to us. So I'm going to miss his contribution and extend our sincere thanks to him for his efforts to contribute as a director. As recently as yesterday, we were receiving incoming advice on the board papers, so we wish him the very best. On the other hand, Claire Higgins has offered herself for re-election. And Claire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Oh, I can stay here?
You can probably stay there, yes, exactly.
Okay. So thank you. For those I haven't had a chance to say hello to yet, obviously you could tell from my accent that I'm an Australian. I have an accounting and economics background, and I also have experience in healthcare, acute, aged care, community health and disability services in Australia. And as David said, I'm currently chairing the Health and Safety Committee of the Board, and I'm a member of the Audit and Risk Committee as well. I believe that Ryman are absolutely committed to providing outstanding care to the people who choose a Ryman village as their home. We want people to be able to trust us and be sure that they feel safe and secure in their homes. The Ryman villages that I've visited are like no other village that I've seen in Australia. I know that Melburnians are embracing the unique offering that Ryman has, and I'm excited that we're continuing to expand our footprint. The sites that Ryman have acquired both in Australia and New Zealand will become beautiful homes for the residents. And I'm very proud to be part of this story. I'm proud to be associated with Ryman, the innovative approach to care, the way in which Ryman value its staff, and the absolute commitment to the best outcomes for the residents, staff and the shareholders. And I would be honoured if you would support my reappointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. So I'm happy to move that Claire Higgins be re-elected a director of the company. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Kim. In terms of the motion, you need to mark your voting cards in the way that you wish to vote, so you can vote either for, against or abstain in the appropriate place in the voting card. And for those of you using the electronic voting card, move to the next resolution by touching the arrow 3/4 of the way up on the right-hand side. I'm not sure how much time I need to give you to do that. If we just press ahead with the second motion relates to the auditor's remuneration, and I now move that the directors be authorised to fix the auditor's remuneration for the ensuing year. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Thank you. Seconded by Donald Arthur. Could you please now also mark your voting cards either for, against or abstain, or if you're using the electronic voting card, vote on that basis. If you need any assistance, we have Link Market Services available, so if anyone wants help, stick their hand up. No? Very good. All done. Look, I declare the meeting closed, and thank you very much for your attendance. We would now enjoy having morning tea with you, and the management team have got badges on, so feel free to engage with them, and be delighted if you could stay and chat with us. Thank you very much.